The scream that erupted across Lakeview Marina that Saturday morning could have shattered glass. Derek Mitchell, who had been peacefully polishing the brass fixtures on his beloved 28-foot cabin cruiser's second wind, nearly toppled overboard at the sound. He turned to see a woman in designer sunglasses and a white linen outfit that probably cost more than his monthly boat payment storming down the dock toward him, her manicured finger pointing like a missile launcher. "That is my spot. How dare you park here?" Derek blinked twice, genuinely confused. He'd owned Slip B12 for 3 years now. The laminated permit hanging from his steering console confirmed it, as did the harbor master's records and the monthly fees that reliably drained his bank account. But the woman approaching him, designer handbag swinging like a weapon, seemed to exist in an alternate reality where facts were optional conveniences. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake," Derek said calmly, setting down his polishing cloth. "I had this slip for years." "I don't care what you think you have," she snapped, pulling out her phone and waving it as though digital evidence of her entitlement existed somewhere in its memory. "I specifically told Carlton I wanted a slip with evening sun exposure, and this is the only one that meets my requirements." Carlton was the assistant harbor master, a college kid working summers who was notoriously eager to please the wealthier members. Derek felt his stomach sink. He'd seen this script play out at Lakeview before. Money talked, and it usually got what it wanted. "Look, I'm Derek Mitchell. I've been a member here since 2019. My paperwork is all in order." He gestured to his permit. "You're welcome to speak to Harbor Master Jensen about this, but I don't need to speak to anyone." She cut him off. "My husband is on the board of directors. This slip is now mine. You have until tomorrow to move your little boat to another location." The way she said boat, as if describing something she found stuck to the bottom of her designer sandals, made Derek's blood simmer. Second Wind wasn't some fancy yacht, but she was his pride and joy. After his divorce 3 years ago, when Sarah had taken the house and most of what was in it, the boat became both his weekend home and his therapy. "I didn't catch your name," Derek said, struggling to maintain his composure. "Karen Westfield Hayes," she replied with the confident air of someone who expected the name to open doors, or in this case, clear marina slips. "My husband Lawrence just acquired the Henderson property on North Point. We're expanding the dock there too." She looked at Derek with a smile that held all the warmth of a great white shark. "Surely you understand that certain accommodations are made for significant investors in the community." Derek knew the Henderson estate, an 8-bedroom monstrosity with private tennis courts that had been on the market for $4.3 million. He also knew there was no point arguing with someone who carried that kind of financial artillery. "I'll speak with Jensen," he said simply. "You do that." Karen's smile widened. "I expect this space to be available by tomorrow afternoon. We're having guests for a sunset cruise." As she click-clacked away on her expensive heels, Derek sank onto his boat's cushioned bench seat. His weekend sanctuary was about to be taken from him by someone who probably wouldn't even appreciate it. But as he glanced around his beloved Second Wind, his eyes fell on the engine compartment hatch and a slow smile spread across his face. Derek had been putting off addressing what the mechanic had cheerfully called a small leak in the cooling system. Nothing dangerous. The boat was perfectly seaworthy, but it did mean that after about 4 hours of operation, the boat had an unfortunate tendency to spew a spectacular amount of oily bilge water back into the lake. Perhaps it was time to be a gracious marina neighbor after all. Derek's meeting with Harbor Master Jensen went exactly as he'd expected. Jensen, a weathered old sailor with 30 years of marina management under his belt, sat behind his cluttered desk looking genuinely pained. "Look, Mitchell, my hands are tied here," Jensen said, rubbing his salt and pepper beard. "The Westfield Hayes family just made a donation that's covering our dock renovation costs. The board chairman called me personally." Derek stared out the office window at his beloved _Second Wind bobbing peacefully in Slip B12. "So that's it. 3 years of membership means nothing compared to one big check." Jensen had the decency to look ashamed. "They're offering you Slip D7 as compensation. It's the same size, just on the opposite side of the marina, with no afternoon shade, right next to the pump-out station." Derek finished flatly. The D dock was nicknamed Divorce Dock because it was where members with the least seniority or smallest boats were relegated. The odor on hot summer days was legendary. "I can throw in a free detailing service," Jensen offered weakly. Derek stood to leave, then paused. A plan was forming, one that required a careful approach. "You know what? It's fine. I've been thinking about upgrading to a bigger boat anyway." He affected a casual shrug. "Actually, I wonder if Mrs. Westfield Hayes might be interested in purchasing _Second Wind_. She seemed quite taken with the slip, and it's a package deal in my mind." Jensen raised an eyebrow. "You sell her your boat?" "For the right price," Derek smiled. She clearly has the means, and it would save her the trouble of shopping around. Underscore second wind underscore is in perfect condition, more or less. The harbor master looked skeptical, but jotted down Karen's contact information for Derek. Your funeral, Mitchell. That woman strikes me as the type who complain about the color of a life preserver while drowning. Karen Westfield Hayes answered her phone on the fifth ring, her voice dripping with impatience until Derek mentioned his boat. I decided that rather than simply relocate, I might be willing to part with underscore second wind underscore entirely, he explained. She's a beautiful vessel, perfect for entertaining on the lake. Custom teakwood finishes, comprehensive navigation system, fully functional galley. How much? Karen cut in. Derek named a figure nearly double what the boat was worth, expecting to be laughed off the phone. Fine, Karen said without hesitation. Lawrence will have his assistant arrange the transfer. We'll take possession tomorrow before our sunset cruise. Derek nearly dropped his phone. Don't you want to inspect it first? Take it for a test ride? Mr. Mitchell, I've hosted the governor on my husband's jet. I doubt your little boat will present any challenges I can't handle. My decorator will likely renovate the interior anyway. Derek felt a momentary pang of guilt, which quickly evaporated when Karen added, Besides, I'm sure it's quite adequate for someone at your level. Of course, Derek replied smoothly. Just one thing, the fuel tank is nearly empty. Marina policy requires a full tank on transfer. Then fill it, Karen snapped. Add it to the sale price. After hanging up, Derek sat in stunned silence. He just sold his beloved boat to the most entitled person he'd ever met, for nearly twice its market value. The boat, the cooling system leaked that would, after several hours of operation, release an impressive slick of oily bilge water. The boat that needed several specific maintenance steps to prevent this from happening during a lengthy cruise. Steps he had no intention of explaining to Karen Westfield Hayes. Derek made 3 calls that evening. The first was to his mechanic friend, canceling the cooling system repairs scheduled for the following week. The second was to his lawyer, confirming that an as-is sale would protect him from any liability for disclosed mechanical issues. And the third was to his boat insurance company, transferring coverage to the new owner effective immediately after sale. As he packed up his personal belongings from the cabin the next morning, Derek patted second wind's helm affectionately. Well, old girl, we're about to serve up some justice. Make me proud. The transfer of ownership proceeded with the efficiency that only obscene amounts of money can facilitate. By noon the following day, Derek had a cashier's check in hand and was watching from the harbor master's office as Karen Westfield Hayes conducted a perfunctory inspection of her new acquisition. It's smaller than I remembered, she commented loudly enough for her voice to carry across the dock. A young man in khakis and a polo shirt, likely the assistant she'd mentioned, trailed behind her taking notes on a tablet. We'll need to replace all this nautical-themed decor, she waved dismissively at the classic brass fixtures Derek had meticulously polished for years. Derek had already signed the as-is bill of sale, which specifically mentioned that the boat had existing maintenance requirements and that the new owner accepted full responsibility for all operational outcomes. His lawyer had assured him this would protect him from liability while being just vague enough to cover the cooling system issue. The fuel tank is full as requested, Derek told her, handing over the keys with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The engine starts with the key and this button sequence. He demonstrated the starting procedure, which involved an extra step to prime the fuel line, a quirk of older marine engines. I'm sure Carlton can handle the technical details, Karen replied, barely glancing at the controls. He'll be piloting for our event. Carlton, the assistant harbor master, looked up in surprise. Mrs. Westfield Hayes, I mentioned I could help dock and moor the vessel when I'm not available tow. Nonsense. Lawrence spoke with your supervisor. You've been reassigned to us for the day. Karen's tone left no room for discussion. We're hosting the regional hospital board. Several significant donors will be present. Carlton shot Derek a desperate glance, but Derek merely shrugged. I'm sure you'll figure it out. The controls are quite intuitive. He pointedly did not mention the cooling system override switch hidden behind the control panel, the one that needed to be toggled every 2 hours to prevent the bilge from backing up. Derek conducted a brief handover showing Karen the basic features while deliberately avoiding any mention of maintenance requirements. When she grew impatient with his explanation of the marine radio protocols, he took the hint and wrapped up his tutorial. One last thing, he said casually. There's a manual in the compartment under the captain's seat. It covers all the essential operations. What Derek didn't mention was that the manual was for the original engine, not the replacement that had been installed 3 years ago with this quirky cooling system. The information would be just accurate enough to create confusion, but not helpful enough to prevent problems. Will that be all, Mr. Mitchell? Karen checked her designer watch. My guests will be arriving at 4, and we have decorators coming to make this place presentable. Derek nodded and stepped off the boat for the last time. "Enjoy your cruise, Mrs. Westfield Hayes. I'm sure it will be memorable." By 3:30, the transformation of underscore second wind underscore was well underway. Workers had covered the practical marine upholstery with white slipcovers. A florist had arranged elaborate centerpieces that Derek knew would topple at the first wake. A catering team was loading in champagne and gourmet appetizers. Derek had moved his remaining possessions to his car, but found himself lingering at a cafe across from the marina, nursing a beer on the outdoor patio with a clear view of the proceedings. He wasn't proud of what he was doing exactly, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching the scene unfold. By 4 o'clock, luxury vehicles began arriving in the marina parking lot. Men in summer blazers and women in flowing dresses and impractical shoes made their way down the dock, where Karen greeted them with air kisses and practiced enthusiasm. "Lawrence and I are simply delighted to welcome you aboard our new vessel," she trilled to an older gentleman who Derek recognized as the hospital's chief of surgery. "We've had it for simply ages, of course, but we just completed a refreshing little update." Derek nearly choked on his beer. The boat had been in her possession for approximately 4 hours, but apparently that didn't fit the narrative Karen was crafting for her guests. Through his binoculars, Derek could see Carlton at the helm, looking increasingly uncomfortable as Karen kept insisting he move away from the controls so her photographer could get better shots of the guests. The young man's objections were clearly being overridden. By 4:30, all 12 guests were aboard, champagne was flowing, and Carlton finally managed to start the engine. The boat backed smoothly out of slip B12 and began making its way toward open water. Derek signaled for another beer and settled in for the wait. If his calculations were correct, the real show would begin in about 3 hours, just as the sun would be setting over the lake, when Karen would be in the middle of impressing her influential guests with her nautical sophistication. He silently toasted underscore second wind underscore as she disappeared around the harbor breakwater. "Make me proud, old girl." 3 hours into it, Karen had advertised her guests as an exclusive sunset soiree on the water. Second Wind was anchored in a picturesque cove on the far side of the lake. This particular spot was known among locals for its stunning sunset views and, more relevantly to Derek's plan, its location directly upwind from the marina and the expensive lakefront properties that lined the North Shore. From his new vantage point at North Point Lookout, a public park with an elevated view of the lake, Derek watched through his binoculars as Karen's party reached its crescendo. He could make out the white-clothed figures mingling on the deck, crystal glasses catching the golden hour light. Even from this distance, he could tell that Karen was in her element, holding court at the stern where she directed Carlton to set up an impromptu captain's table. Poor Carlton had spent most of the cruise attempting to familiarize himself with the boat's systems while simultaneously serving as Karen's personal attendant. Each time he tried to check the engine compartment, Karen had summoned him to open another bottle of champagne or adjust the music volume. Derek checked his watch, 7:15 p.m. If the cooling system held to its usual pattern, things should be getting interesting right about now. Aboard Second Wind, Carlton was beginning to worry. For the past 20 minutes, he'd been noticing a slight vibration coming from the engine compartment, accompanied by a smell that his limited maritime experience still recognized as trouble. But Mrs. Westfield Hayes had been explicit. He was not to disrupt the ambience with technical concerns while her guests were present. "And then I told the hospital board," Karen was saying, gesturing with her champagne flute, "that Lawrence and I would personally match the next million in donations. You should have seen their faces." Her audience of board members and potential donors laughed appreciatively while nibbling on canapes. The hospital's chief fundraiser, a shrewd woman named Eleanor Barnes, raised her glass. "To the Westfield Hayes family, Lakeview's most generous new residents." As the group clinked glasses, Carlton finally seized his opportunity. He approached Karen and whispered urgently, "Mrs. Westfield Hayes, I really need to check the engine. There's a strange noise and—" "Not now," Karen hissed through her perfect smile. "Can't you see we're making a toast? Go refill Dr. Braddock's glass. He's pledged $300,000 already." "But ma'am, I think there might be a mechanical issue that needs immediate." "Carlton," Karen's voice took on the steely quality that had already made her infamous at the marina in less than 48 hours. "This event is worth millions to the hospital. Unless this boat is actually sinking, I don't want to hear another word about it. If it's sinking." "No, but—" "Then handle it quietly. That's what we're paying you for." Carlton retreated, knowing a losing battle when he saw one. He made his way to the engine compartment hatch, trying to be inconspicuous as he lifted it for a quick peek inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. The bilge was filling with a noxious mixture of water and oil that was dangerously close to the level where it would start backflowing into the drainage system. He needed to find the manual override, the one Derek had vaguely mentioned but never shown him. Frantically, Carlton began searching the control panel, running his hands behind it as engine temperature gauges crept steadily upward. There had to be a switch, a lever, something. Meanwhile, at the stern, Karen was reaching the climax of her carefully choreographed evening. The sun had begun its final descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in dramatic oranges and purples, the perfect backdrop for what she planned next. "If I could have everyone's attention," she announced, tapping her glass with a silver spoon. "Lawrence and I wanted to share this special moment with all of you as we announce our intention to endow a new wing at Lakeview General." The guest applauded appreciatively. Dr. Braddock, the chief of surgery, beamed with unconcealed delight at prospect of expanded facilities. "We prepared a little token for each of you," Karen continued, gesturing to her assistant, who began distributing small gift bags. "A memento of this perfect evening on our perfect." A loud clump from below deck interrupted her speech, followed by a gurgling sound that experienced boaters would immediately recognize as very, very bad news. "What was that?" Eleanor Barnes asked, looking toward the stern where the noise had originated. "Just the anchor chain settling," Karen improvised smoothly. "As I was saying, Lawrence and I believe that giving back is." This time, the interruption was impossible to explain away. A geyser of black, oily water suddenly erupted from the drainage outlet at the back of the boat, arcing gracefully through the air before splattering across the pristine white tablecloth, the carefully arranged flowers, the gourmet hors d'oeuvres, and most catastrophically, across the front of Karen's designer white linen dress. For one perfect moment, the tableau froze. Karen with her mouth open in mid-sentence, her guests leaning away from the spreading stain with expressions of horror, and Carlton emerging from below deck with an apologetic grimace. Then the spell broke and chaos ensued. "My Louboutins!" shrieked the hospital board member as the oily slicks spread across the deck. "The endowment contracts!" gasped Dr. Braddock, snatching at papers that were rapidly becoming translucent with grease. And at the center of it all stood Karen, her white outfit now decorated with an impressive Rorschach pattern of black engine oil, her carefully arranged hair dripping, her expression transitioning from shock to a fury so incandescent it seemed capable of igniting the oil slick around her. "Carlton!" she bellowed, just as a second, more impressive geyser erupted from the drainage system, this one catching her full in the face mid-scream. From his lookout point on shore, Derek couldn't cure the commotion, but he didn't need to. The sight of dark liquid spraying across the previously immaculate white deck was visible even without binoculars. He raised his beer in his silent toast to second wind's grand finale. "Right on schedule, old girl," he murmured with grim satisfaction.